Good morning, everyone. Happy day after Memorial Day weekend back. Thank you for joining us this morning. We today are hosting our second in a series of community conversations. And as you'll see with our next slide, that we are, just to redefine ourselves in case you're unable to join us last time, we are the APBS Mid-Atlantic PBIS Network. And we are a collaboration of many partners across the Mid-Atlantic region. At the Center for Social Behavioral Support at Old Dominion University, Susan Barrett, Patty Hirschfeld, and myself, Kimberly Yannick, work there. And from Shepherd Pratt, our partner, Jennifer Jeffrey Pearsall, joins us. And as you'll see on the next slide, we have additional folks who work to support this network. And at Old Dominion University, Dr. Tonelson and Dr. Gable at the Center for Implementation and Evaluation of Education Systems work with us. Catherine Bradshaw at the University of Virginia, and Mark Wiest at University of South Carolina. And we have some informal partners because we discovered in our continuum of supports that we needed community wraparound support for technology and media. So we want to give a shout out to Hannah Hirschfeld and Larry Guthrie for also supporting our work. If you have not had an opportunity to join the network, there's a QR code there that you can scan, and you can also use the registration link. And I might ask Patty, our colleague who is manning the chat box for us this morning, to post that link if she has an opportunity in the chat box as well. I'm going to take a moment to introduce you to our speaker today, who is guiding the conversation. And because we've had such a large response to these, it's more of, at the moment, just hearing some considerations for how we might navigate the work that we're all doing. So Susan will be discussing with us some ideas that we've been looking at, and we encourage you to use the chat box in the Zoom room. But Susan is the director of the Center for Social Behavioral Support at Old Dominion University. She is a TA partner, TA director, and a content expert with the Center on PBIS, the National Center out of Oregon. And I've known Susan for quite many years now, and I will tell you that she just works tirelessly and effortless to support all of us in this work. She is so innovative, always thinking ahead to the next thing, and the rest of us are kind of catching up most of the time. So I hope you'll join me in welcoming Susan today as she leads us in this next conversation. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you so much, Kim. That was quite an introduction. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate all of your support and Patty's support in making this webinar happen. And good morning to all of you. It's an absolute honor that you joined us this morning. I am out in California on the West Coast, so it's a little bit earlier. So I will be drinking my coffee with this conversation this morning. We are going to take a bit of a deeper dive and follow up with kind of the conversation that was started. So we'll do a little bit of setup this morning, and then I really want to focus on redesigning our systems of support and really kind of filling out some of the details that Dr. SUGA started with us during the first conversation. I'm going to focus on kind of the mental health needs of our students, our families, and our staff in this work, and really build, using the MTSS PBIS framework, a plan for moving forward over the next 36 months. So that's kind of the initial setup. If you did not join us for the first conversation, I did provide a link in this slide so that you can go in and look at the first conversation with Dr. SUGA. Just to kind of review some of the highlights of that presentation as this one builds on it. We want to make sure that kind of in this time right now, we're reflecting on the lessons learned of what we've already established through the PBIS and MTSS framework. And that logic is going to be really, really important as we construct that 36-month plan moving us forward. It's going to help us organize all of the things that we are going to need to do coming back online. And we're going to use that public health approach, that tiered logic, to manage the increased need. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is really this thought about staying at the aggregate level and really fortifying and strengthening what we're doing at tier 1, because there's just no way we're going to be able to meet the demand if we're really not thinking about meeting the needs of the vast majority of our students, families, and staff. So we really want to take advantage of what we've learned. And I'm going to build off this really critical point that George brought up about starting now to really plan, really be thinking about how we can support our staff, how we can support one another, and how we can uncover the specific needs of the population that we're serving. I'm going to talk a little bit about that strategy, and we're going to talk about starting with the basics, right? You guys have been working really hard on developing out your teams through the PBIS process or the MTSS process. And so we really want to take this time to strengthen those teams, maybe expand the data sets that we're using or that we're accustomed to be using to identify the specific need. We'll do a quick summary of things that we can do to build those safe and effective environments. And then finally, do a little bit of discussion on strengthening and deepening our relationships, not only with our students, but with one another. So again, just building on kind of the major critical points that Dr. SUGA took us through on that first conversation. So with that, we have provided kind of an overall planner to organize the notes that you might be taking today. And we wanted to organize that across staff, students, and families, right? And we really want to use that same kind of approach and protocol as we think about the different populations that we're all serving. We're also going to perhaps organize our thoughts and the things that we're going to deliver using that data systems practices piece, right? So this could be a way, as you're taking notes today, as you're working with your team, as you're collecting your plan on really organizing using these categories. Kim, I'm just going to assume that the sound is good and that everybody's seeing the video well. Okay, great. So let's set the stage for a second. I think we've always known this, but through this pandemic, I think that this is coming to the forefront. And it certainly did the first couple of weeks we were in quarantine. But schools are really the primary care and basic service providers, not only of education, but also of food, shelter, safety, mental health, and wellness, right? These are really ground zero for places where most of our kids are getting their basic nutritional needs met. And there's places of emotional safety for them. And the places, most of the places where we get mental health needs, in addition to getting our education needs. And this was true before, during, and it will be true after we go back in the fall. So having said that, we want to make sure that we continue thinking about having mental health and having the Maslow's hierarchy of needs as it's come to the forefront during this time. We want to make sure that we can capitalize on that when we move back, right? There's going to be the sense of urgency to make up the academic gaps or the academic time that perhaps was lost. And so we're really going to rely on our leaders to remind us that we need to establish equal priority for psychological needs, those basic needs, safety needs, the sense of belonging, the sense of self. And we have to pay attention to that before we're able to bloom, right? Before we can kind of move into that academic domain. So how do we kind of stick to this script when we come back online and when there will be this kind of notion or sense of urgency about making sure that we're recovering those academic gaps? It will require both, right? Observation 2. Again, this is very obvious, and it has been very obvious for many of us in this field, but I think the larger population is really taking notice that not only is COVID impacting our Black, Brown, and migrant communities and our more vulnerable populations at a higher rate, but our vulnerable populations will be impacted moving back. And there's really this fragile safety net. So we're really seeing schools as opportunities to be healing centers as we come back out of quarantine and away from COVID. And the other thing that a lot of our communities are also dealing with, are communities that have already been impacted by other events, right? So there's been communities that have been impacted by flood, even more recently or even as recently as last week in Michigan. There's also communities that are not only preparing to come back in the fall and dealing with COVID-19, but also kind of preparing for fire season, right? Or hurricane season. So there's all these factors that are contributing that we're gonna really, again, have to make sure that we're holding steady and making sure we're taking care of one another as we move in and out of these events. Observation 3, there have been extraordinary, innovative moments and scenarios taking place across this whole crisis. It's amazing, the flexibility, the level of innovation, the level of creativity in terms of what we collectively have been able to do. And I want to offer a couple of observations because this really sets the stage for how we come back in the fall. Right, so I want to think about one example, and many of you were doing this right as soon as we were in shelter in place, when we realized that that our children and families throughout our communities needed food assistance that was really getting served within the schools, and we wanted to continue and maintain that through line, but we knew we couldn't do it by ourselves. We knew we didn't have enough resources to make every single school a distribution center. And so what ended up happening is that leadership teams were banded together, knew and identified clearly what the problem was, reviewed data to determine how to make this happen, even though we didn't have enough resources, because we knew it had to happen, right? Even when we ran up against barriers like confidentiality issues with respect to not being able to share which families actually were getting served in food nutrition programs, we didn't let that stop us, right? We actually worked around that and decided that we would use data at the aggregate level that would help us distribute and allocate resources more efficiently. So in this example, the system was able to, using aggregate data, to identify the 4 schools with the largest number of students who are on free and reduced lunch. And that led them to make the decision that those 4 schools would become the food distribution centers, right? They knew that that was the highest level of need. So they harnessed those resources and put them in those distribution centers. Again, when another barrier approached, like funding, they knew they didn't have enough money in the school system to make this happen for the long period of time that was going to be required. So that, again, they reached out to their partners in the community. They combined and commingled funding. They combined resources to meet the need. So again, this is a great example of our ability to be flexible, our ability to look at the aggregate, our ability to overcome barriers to meet the need of our students and our families. Another example really quickly. Again, one of the things that we knew in this time is if we were going to do distance learning, that there were going to be students without equipment, without service, and we knew we needed to get them out to those families immediately for distance or remote learning. So again, not knowing who those families were, survey got put out together, we collected that data, and we built partnerships. Again, we relied on community and business partners, shared and commingled funding, figured out how to distribute what was needed out to the community so that our students could have the right equipment and the right available service. We quickly put together professional development for our staff who didn't feel like they had the comfort or skills to deliver instruction in that way. We even formed teams at the grade level to distribute the workload. So now we could take turns leading the instruction. So I didn't necessarily need to lead the instruction every single day of the week. I was going to lead it on Wednesdays, which gave me time to then think about how to team the different students, how to co-facilitate discussions and launch from platforms from the instruction that was being delivered. This allowed us actually to strengthen our bond of our grade level teams. It allowed us to co-teach and co-facilitate, and it actually allowed our teachers to grow skills in ways they hadn't in a very quick time. And I share these examples with you because these are examples of what we're going to need to stick with moving forward, right? We're going to need to make sure that we are looking at that balcony view, staying at the aggregate, deploying our resources in a very efficient and effective way, and really look to our community partners to be able to come together and have that collective impact, have that communitarian approach moving forward, because there's just no way we're going to be able to do it on our own. So as we go into planning for the next 36 months, we need to expect kind of a rolling phased in approach, right? A lot of us are planning and expecting to go back, but there might be times where we need to shelter in place again. And it might not be the entire state this time, it might be specific communities that are impacted. So how do we have that continuity of education, that continuity of care for all, and stick with the processes and systems that guide our work through PBIS to have that through line in case we do have that rolling phase in and phase out approach. So we're going to talk today a little bit about the teaming processes and some of those procedures that are key to the response. We're going to talk about some of those ways that we're actively pursuing and uncovering needs throughout this process. We're going to talk a little bit today about how to aggregate and analyze that data in real time, because we really have to be nimble as we move through this next 36 months, right? And we've got an amazing opportunity before us. Now is the time, as George reminded us, we've got this opportunity to pause and reset and reimagine what this could look like moving forward. We can focus now. We're going to need to focus in order to reach the sheer magnitude of the issues that are going to come our way on this notion of prevention science, on this notion of fortifying what we've been developing through our tier 1 approaches, to prioritize that pro-social community. Because now more than ever, mental health is going to be everyone's job. And we're going to need our mental health leaders to build out the capacity of everyone so we all feel a little bit more confident and competent to handle the mental health needs coming forward in the next 36 months. And again, we're going to rely on those same systems and structures to help us promote those wellness structures. We're going to make sure that our staff are healthy, and we're going to dedicate our next community conversation to thinking about staff wellness and establishing that healthy workforce. So we'll dig in a little deeper next time. But the other thing now more than ever to think about that, the graphic around we have to Maslow before we can bloom, is that we can't talk about academic rigor without talking about how we develop and deepen our relationships with one another and with our students and our families, and that we're incorporating and infusing teaching our social emotional competencies right alongside our academics, right? And when we establish this culture of wellness, and now more than ever, we have to see that teaching social emotional behavior competencies or your SEL curriculum is instructional time, right? So the stress of teaching that during academic time shouldn't stress us out anymore, because we know that we will actually recover our academic gains if we're paying really critical attention to the extent to which we're promoting SEL and social emotional competencies. So we've got an amazing opportunity. So I'm going to pause and have you just reflect a little bit and ask some questions of you. So we've got these amazing, creative, flexible, compassionate moments during this crisis. So how do we take that creativity, that flexibility, that compassion, and how do we reimagine school forever? How do we let that momentum that we were able to overcome funding barriers, we were able to overcome confidentiality barriers And we were able to solve problems that were right there before us. How do we continue to maintain that creativity and that level of flexibility? And how do we have teams, our tier 1 leadership teams, how do we expand them, and how do we position them to have authority to use data in the aggregate to continue to develop solutions thinking about that framework? So I'm just going to pause for a couple of maybe 30 seconds to let you all chat. And we'd love to hear kind of your thoughts or things that you're thinking about or wondering about. So I'll just take a moment. And Patty, I know that you are looking at the chat. Are there anything you're seeing coming forward?
Not yet. We'll give people a little bit of time to post.
Okay, wonderful. I will take a sip of my coffee. Might be too early to kind of have a little chat.
Here we know. We need to reassure teachers that it's okay to teach what is essential, and maybe just do the test for a while. Recognizing the importance of family and community partners, embracing that partnership.
Awesome. Yeah, and again, we're going to be talking and going into a deeper dive with respect to family and community partnerships and engagement with Dr. Mark Wiest in the next, I think it's the next one, Kim, right?
Yeah.
Again, this notion, and you all said it, right? We're going to need to make sure that we have this plan for the increased mental health needs of our students, staff, and families. And when we bring our expanded partners, especially our families and community partners together, we can make schools kind of the healing centers at the core of what we do, right? It's just going to be essential that we maintain that as a priority. So thank you so much for joining us this morning in the chat box. Really appreciate your comments and thoughts. So I want to talk about mental health for a second, and I want us to kind of think about how we expand our notion or idea of what we kind of think of mental health. And usually when we throw out that word, a lot of us are thinking about somebody that's getting specific technical skills. They're sitting in an office and they're getting supports from a specialist. And I just want to offer this morning, as we start thinking about broadening that out a little bit more, that we might want to think about what mental health could be in the role that we serve in schools. And so in my mind, when somebody says mental health or somebody says wellness, these are the pictures I think of in my mind, right? Those smiles and those greetings and those authentic relationships and bonds that take place thousands of times through the day inside our school. And while we are going to need to reimagine and adjust our greeting strategy, knowing that we're going to have some physical distance, that greeting will continue to be such an important piece of the mental health and the wellness and the healing centers that we bring forward. So what extent can we build and shape routines for everybody to continue to have our greeting strategy? And it might be air high fives or air hugs for now, but we're still going to need to maintain those positive contacts throughout the day and those positive greetings. Again, similarly, this is what mental health looks like, right? It's kids engaged in activities, it's smiling, it's looking at positive contacts, it's listening into the conversations that are occurring, where we're all kind of pulling, or you can just feel the kindness in the room, right? So these are the things that it looks like. And again, we're going to have to adjust kind of what we do. Even though we might be physically distanced, we can still be social, and we're going to need to adjust. But it will be really critically important, again, to make sure that we give time and space to develop bonds and strengthen bonds with one another as we heal in this moment. And similarly, our teams will serve as ways that we can strengthen our relationships. And we might not be face-to-face all the time, we might be working remotely, but we still will increase and develop outer relationships through those small learning communities that we have for staff. So I want us to broaden out our thinking about what mental health looks like, because in these pictures, this is what mental health looks like. And when we say mental health is for all, and we're thinking about these types of activities, it makes it easier to adjust our thinking to say, I can be a mental health ambassador because I can put forward a positive greeting. I can have a positive contact. I can develop out relationships, right? We also might want to think, as we expand our lens of thinking about what mental health is, are the strategies and skills that we're going to need for coping and stress, right? And as educators, we teach skills. And so that might, in thinking about teaching strategies and skills for coping, this might make it a little bit easier to think about our role and our capacities to serve as mental health ambassadors coming back as we build our plan. And so to what extent can we help build out routines moving forward about setting in motion a daily calm activity inside our classrooms, right? A time to be still, a time to be reflective, a time where we can turn off the lights and listen to calm music, a time to slow down and do some deep breathing exercises and some deep belly breaths to reset and to just have a calm moment. Again, these are the things that can help us heal moving forward. And we had already started to put a lot of these things in place before COVID-19. It will be critically important that we develop and foster professional development and skills for our staff so they feel comfortable doing this consistently coming back online. Additionally, what are the daily activities and movement that we can incorporate, right? What are maybe walks and exercise and outdoor time? That's going to be critically important, again, as ways to de-stress our bodies. And then finally, biology breaks. To what extent can we have moments where we can stand and stretch and move and have mind breaks? We can do this in distance learning, and we can put this forward when we go back and we're together face to face. The important piece is that we might need to increase the frequency or dose that we're doing as we adjust our new kind of normal, if you will. So again, let's expand what we've been thinking about when we use the term mental health and wellness for all. So mental health for all means that we're going to continue to give positive greetings. We're going to build that into our routine, our daily routine. We're going to increase our dose of positive connections across the day. And we're going to use routines that help us increase our dose of calming strategies, making sure that we're incorporating our daily physical activities and some of those biology breaks. So we might need to increase the dose of that throughout the next 36 months. Mental health for all will also require us to continue to be consistent, predictable, safe, and establish equitable learning environments. We'll talk a little bit about that and give some examples about how we do that in a couple of minutes. These things are going to be really important because we know in the research that when we do these things, this actually promotes resilience and healthy brain functioning in children who have experienced trauma. We can actually rewire the brain when we do this, because endorphins get released when we have these social moments with one another, and it actually provides the brain to heal itself. And these qualities are really important for that healing process for kids and students and staff and families who have experienced trauma, but it's really also important for all of us right now as we've gone through different aspects of COVID-19 and have experienced some level of stress with this process. So it's going to be good to heal and use these constructs for us to all heal. So mental health is for all. So when we're building that 36-month plan, really be thinking about expanding what we consider to be mental health, and think about things that we can do consistently together that will promote and foster those relationships. So again, another time just to kind of pause and chat or take some notes or get some notes down as you're thinking about your plan moving forward. how will we build and develop consistent, predictable routines that can include positive greetings, that allow us to incorporate that time for learning about each other and that time to include those calming strategies across the day? What are those times that you might predict during the day, maybe perhaps during transition times, that we might want to put our calming strategy and just build that into our routine coming back? Because these will serve as the foundations for teaching social emotional behavior skills. Many of our school systems haven't quite installed SEL curriculum into their curriculum, and they haven't quite embedded it into their academic content. That's okay. In the first couple of months, if we can focus on developing those relationships, if we can focus on positive greetings and calming strategies, that will set the foundation when we are ready to incorporate those social emotional curriculum into our academic content. We will have the building block already built. The other thing to consider is that when we're talking about these predictable routines, these are things we can do that are absolutely free right now. It will not cost a dime to pull this time allocation into the structure of our day, right? So how do we develop and build those consistent, predictable routines that allow for those greetings and times to bond? And in the midst of trying to recover those academic losses, how do we remind our leaders, maybe through data, right, that we're going to need, that they're going to need to model for us and support this priority for these wellness activities? So again, I'll just pause for a moment, have my little coffee break, and see what comes up in the chat.
Susan, a common theme from people still posting from your last question would be to make sure to get input for multiple stakeholders before making the plan to return.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Again, Kay Klein, listening to families and children. So that's a pretty powerful message across everyone here.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That's great. And, you know, when I think about getting and actively pursuing and uncovering the needs, we're going to need to be putting that through the whole 36 months, right? Because that it definitely could change moment to moment. And so being able to, again, get data really quickly and timely so that we can reposition our resources is going to be really important. So I really appreciate that thinking in terms of using data. The other thing,
there's also a post here that's probably on everybody's mind and something we might want to think about addressing more formally at some point is how are we reshaping kids' readiness to be in a classroom and learn, given what their life has looked like for, you know, with social media. And I think that's a really important consideration, and that would be something we want to be prepared for, like you said. So someone could do that.
Which might require us to have more frequent breaks, right? Because we're used to moving in and out and having short durations of instructional time. And I know that we're all going to be worried about instructional time, but I think if we can focus on the quality of instruction rather than the quantity, it will help us mitigate our stress as we think about the academic needs of our children. I also really am concerned, and again, to that point about data, we're really going to need to uncover the needs of our staff and really think about ways that we can design supports for our staff. So similar to how we're kind of providing morning circles for our students, we could use that same practice and provide morning circles for our staff so that we kind of have moments before students join us during the day to pause and reflect and ground ourselves and talk to each other or practice a new skill that we're going to be using, like a calming strategy for our staff before the start of the day. The other notion I want to pull in is, as we're designing systems of support for staff, is really anchoring us on our PLCs and our teams to be a source of support, and really think about how we design and share the workload and how we co-teach moving forward in this space. The other thing I think after we have, after we're exhausted, after the first couple of weeks. I think we need huddles, particularly after maybe a crisis occurs, team and staff huddles, so that we can have an opportunity to decompress and evaluate how we might reposition things moving forward. And then the other thing I'm wondering about is, are there designated quiet spaces for staff to regroup, reset, and use their calming strategy, use their practice, and build their neutralizing routine? So similar to how we're thinking about designing supports for students, we're going to need to do the same for our staff. Okay. So let's talk about designing and thinking about the protective environment. And no matter what plan we engage in, because we're not really sure what will happen, we do know that teams will be the backbone of what we do. And we knew that we're going to need to rely on data from multiple sources, relying really heavily on our student voice, our family voice, and our community and staff voice to bring that data in to impact, to really be the way that we draw up our 36-month plan. We might want to incorporate 3 aspects of this. We might want to start with, how do we design using our data what a safe and effective environment will look like moving forward? And then again, how do we have this blended approach to instruction? So let's talk a little bit about that for a moment. It all starts with kind of the tier 1 team, right? And we've been talking about this through the interconnected systems framework, which is PBIS plus our community mental health, and incorporating that and infusing that into the framework. We've been talking about making sure that at the tier 1 level, that we adequately represent our school community. Many times our tier 1 doesn't have student voice, family voice, and community employed mental health providers at the table. So in what ways, similar to how we did during COVID, how are we going to expand our membership, and how are we going to lean in to make sure that our students and families are leaders in this work? Our mental health providers, both school employed and community employed, are seen as leaders, and they're driving these priority messages. And then how do we actively pursue and uncover and have an accurate picture of all of our students' needs? And so as you look at some of the data reflected below here, these are kind of what I'm going to couch as kind of the old data sets, right, prior to COVID-19. But they still will be very important to inform us moving forward. We want to make sure that we really have an accurate picture of what our students need, the percentage of students who are meeting attendance criteria. And that might be a data point that you look at before COVID-19, and it also might be a data point that you're looking at now in terms of the percentage of students who are checking in and signing on to your distance learning classes, or the percentage of students that are completing work. It will also be important to break out that percentage number in different subgroups, so we have that equity lens going on. What about the percentage of students who feel connected? Could we use some of that data right now, really quick focus groups during our distance learning calls, or very quick surveys to get a sense of the students who feel connected? But again, we're going to need to continue to make sure we've got mechanisms that allow us to capture this in real time, so we can adjust our ability to strengthen tier 1, or adjust how we approach tier 1 when we have these percentages and we're looking at this as a collective piece. What about the percentage of students with adequate housing, percentage of students who've experienced trauma? Like, how do we continuously uncover this specific need? So as you're thinking about tier 1 team, in what ways should we expand our membership? And in what ways should we be expanding our data set to start with? And we can be doing those things right now in our distance learning as we meet virtually as team members. So the system of support, the MTSS, PBIS process you all have put in place, that stays. The context is the thing that changes. So even if we have to move and phase in and out, the context will change, but the team process will remain the same. So how will we expand membership? How do we use that common problem-solving agenda across those different platforms? And could we continue those wellness checks moving forward? Could we continue to establish and make sure that we have really clear norms, both in a face-to-face and virtual platform? How do we continue to meet regularly despite these disruptions in learning? And again, maintain that through line of consistently meeting, consistently looking at data. So right now, do you have your meeting dates and times confirmed? Right, even if we have to move in and out. And is your primary mission as a tier 1 team to actively and uncover the needs of students, families, and staff? And do we have their voice in that? Do we have ways to get that in real time? So here's an example. Many of you are probably using the TIPS form, the team initiated problem solving form, or an agenda that's similar. The trick, that through line, will be to maintain our meeting times, whether we're in remote, if we have to do it on a Zoom platform, or we're doing it face-to-face in brick and mortar, we still will maintain that same TIPS form, right? And we can adjust and adapt it to fit the needs of the team. And so you can see in red, we've put some adjustments here in TIPS where we have clearly identified norms when we're face-to-face, and we've got team norms when we're meeting virtually. And we've agreed to those and we've selected those, again, with the voice of our expanded team. We can just select whether or not we're having this meeting face-to-face or virtual. If we're incorporating telehealth into this meeting where we're bringing our community mental health providers, it might be a hybrid. We also have incorporated down under the agenda some wellness checks, right? To make sure that we're taking time in our teams to strengthen our bonds with one another and to get to know and to continue to get to know each other. I think that that's been something that I've really valued and appreciated during the quarantine, is when we do meet as teams, we've got this time set aside where we're checking in with one another. And I feel like I've bonded with my colleagues more than ever before. Again, how do we maintain that moving forward over the next 36 months? So we've given some reflective questions and some gratitude questions, again, for our team to continue that routine. So we know that most of our students, if we're focused on tier 1 and strengthening our tier 1, most of our students, families, and staff can be supported if we can fortify and strengthen our tier 1 supports. It will be important for our tier 1 team to stay at the aggregate, right? We will not talk about specific students at our tier 1 team. We have to stay at that balcony view so that we can deploy our resources really effectively. And we're going to have to look at data before COVID in terms of where the need was before, knowing that our kids who had those needs will probably need additional support. But we also should be looking at data during COVID, right? And I've already given a couple of examples about maybe looking, I know you all are already doing this now, looking at that percentage of students logging in or completing assignments. But we should also be uncovering the percentage of students and staff who've been personally impacted in various ways, or the percentage of our students and staff who may not be able to return face-to-face because of an underlying health condition, or the percentage of staff and students who have such additional stress that they won't be coming back right away, right? So how do we position ourselves where we can look at those percentages and get in front of that data to make a plan on how we're going to kind of commit to that hybrid approach? And then how do we have that rolling ongoing discovery where we're actively uncovering the needs, whether that be through formal or informal screening data points, looking at attendance and check-ins, looking at nursing logs, looking at our instructional time, and looking at our behaviors. Many of us have not really deployed a formal screening mechanism, so those family and staff and community check-ins are going to be really, really important. And we'd be happy to share some of those questions and check-in protocols with you if you're interested in that resource. This data will be so important for district level teams to rely on that to deploy and distribute their resources based on need, right? Similar to that food example that we gave in the very beginning. How do we again look at that data to deploy our mental health resources in the same way we deployed food? And how do we let or not let funding and confidentiality issues get in the way of us being able to deliver on that promise? At the school level, we're going to need a very comprehensive tracking system that allows us to identify where those red flags are, and when we kick it up a notch for students and staff and families who need more from us. So looking at that data, and I'm so happy to hear that others in the chat were really reflecting out that we're really going to need the voice and choice of our students, our families, and our staff in this work. When we're thinking about Tier 1 team and we're thinking about supporting our students, the Tier 1 team, believe it or not, is also there to support our staff. And so in much the same way, how do we uncover, again, at that aggregate level, the percentage of staff who feel connected right now, of the percentage of staff who feel like they can manage their workload, right? George, I think, talked about getting back to basics. How do we hold that line and really stay at that basic foundational level and not overload our workforce, right? How do we just kind of stick to that bare bones moving forward, and how do we focus on building those foundational elements in the now so we're not stressing ourselves out feeling like we can't manage the number of things we have to do? What about the percentage of staff who feel like they're managing their changing roles as we ask them to navigate the mental health landscape? Right, again, we've got this moment in time right now where we could be listening and leaning into what the staff need and creating professional development activities where they feel a little bit more confident moving forward. So the Tier 1 team, in addition to thinking about the data at the student level, let's also really consider data at the staff level. Okay, I know we're quickly running out of time, and I've got about 800 more slides ready to go. Let me just share with you a couple on the safe and effective environment. Again, many of you have already developed your positively stated expectations and your routines, and you've adapted them for distance learning. I want to just share with you a couple of examples on how the matrices have been adapted to fit some of the safety elements moving forward. This is really that way that we're going to be able, using our teaching matrix and our to be able to align and integrate. This is kind of the first way that we can do that. And we've already seen amazing examples of school systems that have adapted their teaching matrix to fit the social emotional competencies, to fit the bully prevention strategies. So the teaching matrix can really be that fluid way to create those predictable and consistent routines. So again, many of you have teaching matrices that look a lot like this example, that have really focused on what we want kids to say and do across locations and settings in our buildings, right? And we've matched and have a common language and common kind of script that creates that consistent landscape for all of our staff to use. More recently, many of us have started to use this teaching matrix to think about the social emotional competencies. So we're really expanding this utilization to think about positioning our common script and our common language to talk about ways that we can control our emotions. When we feel upset, here are the things that we can do, and put those strategies and skills. This elevates us to be thinking and looking for students that are using these skills and encouraging them to use these replacement skills. So again, I'm going to zip through a couple of examples where we've seen these modifications take place, and just offer, as we're thinking about this teaching matrix, ways that we can continue to make it flexible, continue to look at the data, and as skills get prioritized, to incorporate that into the teaching matrix, because this is the way that we're going to really be able to address the alignment strategies when we're moving forward. So again, this is an example of one that comes from our PBIS center that's in our return to school document that has actually put in those safety elements as we think about our physical distancing needs, our hand washing protocols, and even if we have to wear masks, and perhaps our cleaning strategies. So there's some ways that we've adjusted to fit and manage kind of the expectations for that safety lens. So we put a couple more examples in here, and you all can feel free to take and use them. I really like this example that Patty shared with us last week. It took kind of one step further and went beyond kind of the be kind to actually have a greeting and a smile, say thank you when somebody helps you, right? So it really kind of scripted the moves, if you will, on this teaching matrix. And I really liked the way that they were able to capture and incorporate those elements of distance learning in this example. Couple more here, making sure that we've got those through lines for classroom and distance learning. We might have kids that are using distance learning even though we might be back face to face. So how do we be mindful and adjust for those types of things? And how do we use our student voice in creating and developing and adjusting the teaching matrix? We may have gone a little overboard with some of the examples here, but you get the idea of how we've kind of incorporated the different social emotional competencies, and feel free to take these and run with them as you meet with your teams and adjust your teaching matrix accordingly. So the bottom line in terms of the recommendations, that teaching matrix will allow us to create those consistent, predictable expectations across all locations and across all settings. So it's important that we use those same expectations, whether we're in distance learning or whether we're coming back face to face, or we've got a combination of both. We want to add elements of safety, specifically around hand washing, physical distancing, and possibly wearing masks, depending on what the rules of engagement will be coming back. Perhaps we might want to add a calming strategy, again, identifying what the skills will look and sound like and putting that in our matrix. And we might want to incorporate the staff expectations so that we can remind and prompt our staff to model as we're supporting our students. We also want to make sure, as we're incorporating and infusing other aspects of our Tier 1 components, that we haven't split off and are doing a trauma-informed piece and a PBIS or an MTSS piece. So I wanted to offer a crosswalk. We will have a brief coming out that talks about incorporating trauma features into a PBIS framework in the next week or so. We'll make sure that if you're on our mailing list, we'll definitely email that one out to you. But I wanted just to make sure, as we're reflecting on those Tier 1 components, that we're hitting these components of trauma-informed care. So I wanted to offer this as a crosswalk for how we do that as we're strengthening our Tier 1 approach. So here's the checkbox. As you're thinking about coming back online and thinking about the essential components of building a resilient community, think about your Tier 1 team focus. Stay at that balcony view. Stay at that aggregate level in terms of the data that you're looking to uncover the need. Think about the universal precautions, right? We use hand washing to prevent flu and COVID. What are the things that we can do? What are the conditions, the learning conditions that we can do that are universal precautions for mental health needs, right? So do we have a safe and stable environment? Do we have clearly defined expectations? To what extent can we use that teaching matrix to really build out that safe, consistent, predictable, consistent routine across the board? How do we embed those expectations and procedures and routines and social emotional skills into our instruction? How do we have daily routines that allow classrooms to build the sense of community, foster relationships, and experience connection? How do we put in clearly defined ways for students and staff to ask for help, right? We've actually seen suicide hotlines and warm hotlines get put on the teaching matrix as a way, again, to build that common and define that way that we can ask for help. How do we make sure and ensure that we are consistently positively greeting everybody and having those positive social interactions? Could we deploy the team to maybe do some frequency counts and make it a game, kind of a strategy, if you will, to see if we can increase those numbers? How do we increase our staff to engage in active supervision, where we're scanning and moving and we're interacting and we're taking those times during those transition periods to really increase our bonds? How do we create spaces and routines for teachers to regroup, reset, and build our neutralizing routine, where we can practice when we know we're going to be moving into a stressful environment? We can practice what we're going to say and do that will be modeling calm for our students. And then how do we continue to have this growth mindset, to capitalize on the brilliance that's occurred over the last 10 weeks during our quarantine? How do we continue to have that growth mindset moving forward? And so those are the essential components as you're thinking about delivering on your 36-month plan, which seems like a long time. Again, I think we're probably over. So I'll just stop by maybe offering some reflection questions again, as you think about some of the data that you want to inform all stakeholders, thinking about adjusting your data sources, thinking about adjusting your tier 1 strategies and fortifying that tier 1. And at any point in time as a tier 1 team, I'll just leave you with this last thought. If you start panicking and you don't feel like you've got enough staff and resources to be able to pull this off, then I want you to think about fortifying and strengthening tier 1, right? Because we won't be able to manage at our increased supports if we haven't created that really solid foundation where the vast majority of our students and staff are experiencing success.
Thank you, Susan. We'll give everyone a few moments to finish with the chat. If you wouldn't mind, Susan, just advancing those towards the end so we can, while people are posting remarks. Thank you so much. I hope all of you will join me in thanking Susan for sharing things that keep her up at night, I know, and things that she texts us all in the middle of the night about. So we wake up every morning to things. But just to, as we, do you want to summarize real quick, Susan, or anything else that you want to give us before we wrap up here?
Yeah, I just, we do have this as a Word document, just to, if you're thinking about, you don't have kind of an overall organizer as you're building your plan moving forward, we just wanted to offer a way to think about the data systems practices and think about the strategies and the data sources and the systems that will need to be involved as we support our staff, students, and families.